A good place to start, don't you think, would be to define just what statistics is. Here's a couple of definitions of statistics. First of all, statistics is the study of how to collect, organize, analyze, and interpret numerical information from data. And that's what we will do through this course, is we're going to see how to collect data. And then once we collect it, how are we going to organize it and then analyze it and try to get some information out of that description. And then here's a definition from the International Encyclopedia of Statistical Science. Statistics is both the science of uncertainty and the technology of extracting information from data. So as soon as you see this word here, uncertainty, you can see that we're going to be dealing with some probability. Let's take a look at some terminology. Now, we're going to introduce quite a few terms here, but don't think that you have to just sit down and memorize these. Just read over them. We'll do a couple of examples, and then as we go through the course, they'll just become natural. We'll use the terms often, and you'll just get to know what they are. So how about if we look at the first one here? This will be individuals. All right, so individuals, these are people or objects that are included in a study. And then a variable, well, that's a characteristic of that individual, and we're going to be able to measure it or observe it. Here's an example. We've got wetlands. So the government agencies carefully monitor water quality and its effects on wetlands, blah, blah, blah. Of a particular concern is the concentration of nitrogen in water draining from fertilized lands. All right, so what we're interested in is concentration of nitrogen in water draining from fertilized lands. Now, too much nitrogen can kill fish and wildlife. So what we do is this. We take 28 samples of water from a lake, and the nitrogen concentration is measured for each sample. All right, so first of all, let's identify the variable. So remember, up here at the top here, a variable, that's a characteristic of some individual to be measured or observed. So what is a variable here? It's a characteristic. What are we observing? Well, I think we're observing here the nitrogen concentration. So that's what's going to be our variable. So I will write that here. This is going to be, let me get a color that works here. This is going to be nitrogen concentration, because that's a characteristic of our sample. Our sample is, water. Let's see. Let's go to the next one. Is the variable quantitative or qualitative? Now, we haven't defined it, but quantitative just means, is there a number assigned to it, or is it a quality, like is it red or bright? Okay, well, I think this one is quantitative, because we're going to assign what? We're going to assign some number to it, right? Like right up here, milligrams of nitrogen per liter. So this one is going to be quantitative. And what's the implied population? Okay, now we'll talk about population in a minute, but a population is everything that it is that you're going to observe. So let's talk about populations and samples. So what are we doing in this example here? Down here, right? We are taking samples of water at random from the lake. So what are we doing? We're taking samples. Now a sample is data that are only from some of the individuals of interest. Now we are taking 28 individual scoops of water. So that's going to be our sample. A sample in this case is a scoop of water. And it says of only some individuals of interest. Now all the individuals, every one of them, that's going to be every possible scoop of water from this lake. That's the population, right? So the population here is all the water in the lake, whereas the sample is just some scoops of water from this lake. So we can say this down here at the bottom. What is the implied population? So I'll write it here. Okay, so I've got it here, but let's read it over so you can see what it says. What's the implied population? So this is going to be all the water in the lake. So it's going to be the nitrogen concentration in milligrams of nitrogen per liter of water in the entire lake. All right, so the population is every possible scoop of water in the lake. Our variable is going to be a particular scoop of water, or and it's quantitative, right? Because we're getting a number, we're getting milligrams, and our variable is just the nitrogen concentration. And just the last couple of terms for us, a population parameter is a numerical value that describes an aspect of a population. So this is a number that describes something about the entire population, whereas a sample statistic, all right, so this is a parameter that deals with the entire population, and a statistic, this is a numerical measure that describes something about the sample. So for example, in the wetlands example that we just looked at, we can take a look at a statistic and a parameter. Now, a statistic is going to be a measure that gets assigned to our sample. So remember what we had. We had, say, 28 scoops of water, and then what we did is we measured the nitrogen concentration. So just suppose that we had this. Now, this is we're going to measure an aspect of a sample. So suppose that we just had this, that the average, okay, the AVG, how about AVG for average? The average concentration is, I'm just going to assign 100, like maybe 100, okay, 100 milligrams per liter. So that number, that average is computed just on those 28 scoops. Now, if we could get all the scoops of water out of this lake, okay, that's a huge number. But that's going to be some number here. So this is going to be average concentration of, let's say, of the entire lake. Okay, now we don't know what that is, but here's what we do with statistics. We will take the average in our sample, and we'll make a guess here. We're going to make a prediction that this 100, we hope, is close to the actual value, all right? So maybe, we don't know what this is, but maybe the actual value is 120, all right? This would be the parameter. That's the value that gets assigned to the entire population here. And 100, this is going to be the statistic. So a statistic, that's a number that comes from a sample. A parameter is a number that comes from a population. That's why we call this statistics, because typically we're dealing with numbers or measures that come from samples.